No, nobody's really that good. Obviously, I learned this in Hollywood, working on sets, on shows, on television, on film. The environment that you film in or shoot in or record in is very, very important. And not only physically, but also in an interview, just the energetic dynamic. And so many of us do interviews now virtually, sometimes in person, but usually virtually. So how do you do that? How do you create a comfortable environment when you're not in the same room, you're not in the same building, or you may not be in the same country?
Welcome to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro, your gateway to becoming a thought leader in your field. Dive into the world of elite podcasting and master the art of influence and inspiration. And now, podcast personality, award-winning author and actress, Anne Scottlin.
Welcome back to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro. I'm Anne Scottlin, and you are here to hear the second part 2 of Unlock Interview Secrets of the Pros. Have you ever wondered what the pros do to make those interviews sound so seamless, look so fun? So whether you're doing an audio or a video podcast, this is a great one for you. And we've already got started. So this is, believe it or not, already part 9 in my series, the Podcast Power. I can never say it. I have to change the name. The Podcast Power Playbook. Wow, there's just too many P's there. Podcast Power Playbook. Episode 9 of that series. So excited that we're almost done. And we're going to have our crowning episode next time. And what we began with last time was just reminding you that you can increase your listener podcast base up to 45% when you use the strategies used by podcast pros. And we started covering the art of interviewing. We're going to continue today with more key techniques, some more benefits of great interviews, and stay tuned to the end for a special technique that top interviewers use to get their guests to open up and share their best stories. I'll be sharing my secrets along the way. I think last time I talked about working on my project. I can't remember if I did. I was talking about landscaping and the art of interviewing and how much being prepared makes a big difference. So being prepared, preparation is the key. And I am pleased to report that the landscaping is finally done after, I would say, 8 days of work. It was a lot. But gosh, I should have had a picture here to pop in so you could see what I did. Maybe I will. All right. So we left off talking about pre-interview communication, how every element of your show is important to prepare for, not just winging it. Now, winging it is fun. You can wing it and still be organized. That's my key. That's what I tell my clients when I work with them. You can wing it in an organized way. So even the pros usually have an outline, a set of questions. You don't think they sit down on CNN without a teleprompter that at least keeps them on track and helps them see their time countdown and their general topics and reminds them of questions to ask. No, nobody's really that good. Maybe a few people, or if you have the perfect dynamic with someone. But even if you're having a really fun time, sometimes you get off topic and you forget to cover the points that you promised your audience you would. So you kind of have to be careful. So being organized, having an outline, and then, of course, creating a comfortable environment. Obviously, I learned this in Hollywood, working on sets, on shows, on television, on film. The environment that you film in or shoot in or record in is very, very important. And not only physically, but also in an interview, just the energetic dynamic. And so many of us do interviews now virtually, sometimes in person, but usually virtually. So how do you do that? How do you create a comfortable environment when you're not in the same room, you're not in the same building, or you may not be in the same country? Obviously, number one, building rapport. So start with that casual conversation to ease into the interview. Now, remember, my tip last time was don't have the casual conversation before you press record. Wait. Say, hi, let's get right to it. I don't like to visit right before, but let's catch up momentarily, because some of the best content and the most warm and effervescent conversation often comes from that first few moments in your show when you first shoot the breeze with your guest, not when you shot the breeze before. You come up empty at the beginning of the show and everyone gets all formal, as I mentioned last time. So once you press play, once you've given your introduction, whatever, then start with a casual conversation to ease into the interview. So what have you been doing lately? Ask them, have you been, I know you have a lot, you work with horses, rescue horses. So how's that been going? You have any new horses right now? Or, ask them something about their life, their hobbies, their interests. Ask them something about that's a contemporary issue in the news, or as long as you don't get too sidetracked. That one is a danger. I will warn you. And maybe something unhappy happened to them. Maybe they just lost a family member or even a pet. And you can show genuine interest and empathy in them. And by creating that bond, that space of genuine interest and that space of genuine trust, you are able to then really take off from a confident start once you really dive into the interview. Well, setting the scene. Yes, I can build you a beautiful set, and I do that for some of my clients. And even just knowing what the scene should be in the environment is super helpful. Ensure a comfortable space with minimal distractions. That seems so obvious. First of all, that's your prerogative as the interviewer, as the host. You absolutely need to make sure of that, especially if, like me, you want to have a world-class podcast where you have a very high standard for production. That is a really critical element for you to fulfill, but also the guest. And we talked about that last time briefly. I won't go into it again, but having a tech check on a day prior to your episode is really critical. I won't do an interview without it, unless it is such a high profile person that they already have a seamless environment. They do this all the time, and you can absolutely trust their production value. So they need a quiet space, a comfortable space with minimal distractions. And I don't know if I've told this story before, but I remember this one time where I had a guest, and it was a referral, and we'd had a conversation in advance. I don't think we'd done a tech check. I don't think I was requiring that yet. And this is probably one of the reasons that I do. And we're doing a video podcast, and the guest comes on, and my producer's there, and I'm there, and my co-host was there. And the guest comes on, and they're sitting in a very noisy coffee shop with people, not even like against a wall, with people walking back and forth behind them, with really loud music playing, with people shouting out names for the coffee, and lots of, sounds of dishes. And I could not believe it, but we were live and we didn't have a choice. And so we just had to cut it short, but it was mortifying. And I was mortified to put out that content because the other person, everyone else was counting on that episode being released, and the guest had been promised an episode, and I was mortified. So leaving it at that, you need to stress the importance of having a secure scene, a quiet, comfortable space with minimal. Zero is the best choice distractions. Now, some people have pets. That's my exception. I love pets. If there's a pet that accidentally barks because the UPS man comes to the door, well, that is life and that happens. But in general, please plan for zero distractions as much as possible. Not people sticking their head in. It just never ends. You won't believe it if you haven't been doing this for a while. If you're just getting started, you won't believe it until you do it. How many distractions will crop up? It's absolutely incredible. So number 3 in the overall topic of unlocking the interview secrets of the pros. If you just remember, the first one, preparation, is the key. And the second one is creating a comfortable environment. Number 3, how to conduct the interview. So it's funny because a lot of people think that this, when I talk about interview secrets, they think it's all just about the talking back and forth. That's kind of the secret to what we've discussed already, which is the preparation, which is creating a comfortable environment. So now we get to conducting the interview. Right? So what is the most important part of an interview? If you had to answer, or if you want to enter it here, comment in the comments, what is the most important element of the interview? I'll rephrase it just to give you a hint. What is the most important part of your job as the interviewer? Okay. Active listening, of course. Active listening. Now, to remind you, we know what active listening is, right? Active listening isn't just hearing. You can ask my husband about that if you like. Okay, my lips are sealed. Active listening is when you're actually paying attention, you're focused on the other person. You're not thinking about what you're going to say next. You're not thinking about what your clothes look like or if your hair is right. You're not checking yourself out in your own camera. You're actually paying full attention to them. In the front of your mind, you're not thinking about the production of the show or the time or anything. I mean, that you can run that ticker tape in the back of your head, but not in the front. Active listening, paying really close attention, especially when you ask them questions and they respond. One of the most awful mistakes I see interviewers make, especially clearly amateurs who don't really know what they're doing, is ask a question and then they literally look down to get themselves ready for the next question. And maybe that next question is more interesting to the interviewer. And so you can see them spinning how they're going to phrase it. And they're listening, but this is how they're listening. Good. So, and then they ask the next question. So you see how that is, not only is it unpleasant and obvious for the viewer, if you have a video podcast, or the listener, but it is also really rude to the person who is speaking because you asked them a question and the least you can do is pay attention to the answer and really absorb it, really pay attention to their responses, and then use their answers to guide a follow-up question, dig deeper. So now that you've explained to us, this is an example. So now that you just outlined this primary principle that we should always remember when we're doing XYZ, how does one prepare for a situation like that? Dig deeper. Maybe they answer that question, and then you could ask them if, usually you've asked permission before to put them on the spot. You don't want to do that without asking. Can you give me an example, like a story from your own experience where this happened to you? So now we have 3 layers, and you see, now we really feel like we're connecting with the guest. We feel like we're learning about them. The audience feels like they're included. They're following the line of questioning. So it's much more connected. It's connected and it stays interesting. And this I also promised to talk about briefly last time, which was, as part of the conversation around active listening, what are the pros and cons of interrupting and when is it okay? I love this so much. Okay, so pros and cons. Okay, I'm going to start with the cons of interrupting. A lot of those, I hope to goodness, are obvious to you. Being rude, being more focused on yourself, not really caring, not actively listening, being more obsessed with how you look than how they look, all of those things. One of the cons of about interrupting is not interrupting enough. Okay, I am so sorry. I will just rephrase that completely. Sometimes you don't interrupt enough. Now, this is not most people's problem, but there have been a few shows where I've been a co-host or a co-guest where the host let someone ramble on for so long that we literally got so far off track, we can't even remember what our original point was or the original question was. And the clock is just ticking. And what if that guest was up first and you get to come in second or third or fourth on the panel? You're not going to get any time at all. So while this person is just going on and on and on, usually telling something about themselves, you're kind of like, I wish the host would jump in and intercept this. Now, some people are so afraid of interrupting that they just won't do it. That's more the exception than the rule, but there are some. And I think, when is it okay? When it's okay is when this person has gone on, and don't let them go on and on for too long. Maybe a minute. In broadcast time, a minute is a long, long time. Okay. So maybe let them go on for a minute. At that point, then you want to really actively listen, and you're going to interrupt them with intention about something they said. I can't even believe I'm teaching you how to interrupt people because it sounds so awful. And not everyone's going to agree with me on this. This is my opinion. So you wait till you can see them coming toward the end of a sentence, and they're talking about, oh my gosh, a meal that they had in a restaurant. Let's just make it really random. Like, how do you bring that back into the topic, right? And they're like, and when the steak came out, it wasn't quite done. I'm vegetarian. I don't eat steak, but okay. When the steak came out, it wasn't quite done. And before they can inhale, you're already ready. You've already inhaled, and you say, so when they're like, steak was already done, steak was already done. Oh, that so reminds me of how my grandmother used to make steak. Oh my gosh. But if I get distracted and go down that alley, we will never get on to point 2 of how to be a better marketing professional. So, Jeff, can you tell me, what is the third point? You've given us point 1, point 2. What's the third point that you had in mind for our audience today about being the best marketing professional you can be? I know they're dying to hear it. So, yeah, please share that with us. So, you see what I did there? This is also how I coach clients. So if you really want to, if you want to role play this professionally, let me know. It's a lot of fun. So that is when it is okay to interrupt, in my personal, humble opinion. Otherwise, generally not. And if you know that when you first talk to a client, we're going to take a break in just a minute. When you first talk to the client, when you do your pre-interview or your tech check or whatever, you get a vibe for who they are and how they communicate, right? So if you realize that they're really run-on sentence talkers, if they really can't rein themselves in, and often it's not because they're trying to be rude, but because they're nervous. It's just a human side effect of it often, right? Being nervous. Then you want to remind them on the day of. So how we do this dynamically is I ask you a question, but we are on a clock. So I'm going to ask you specifically to try to keep your answer to 1 to 2 minutes so that I can ask you the other questions my audience is looking forward to hearing you answer. And with all my guests, if you're just going on too long, then I'm going to just do like a thumbs up. And that's your sign to stop as soon as possible. And I'm going to be like, excellent. Thank you, Stacy. That is amazing. Oh, yeah, I forgot we do that now. Thumbs up. Excellent, Stacy. That is amazing. And you move into the next question, right? So that is how you can do it. And also prepare your client, or prepare your guest rather, so they have an expectation. Well, before we go on to the last 2 points here under conducting the interview, we've wrapped up active listening. We've got more, but first we're going to take a quick commercial break. Before we do that, please do please subscribe, please leave a message. I would love to hear from you, answer your questions on the show, and share this link with a friend who might also enjoy it. Join the podcasting conversation. We'll be right back.
Picture this. You have worked your whole life to become an expert, a leader, a change maker, but you're so busy, most people will never discover you to recognize your work. Anne Scottlin, founder of Podcast Maestro, understands this challenge. With a decade of Hollywood experience and a proven track record as a business coach, Anne turns seasoned professionals into thought leaders through the art of podcasting. Podcast Maestro offers plug-and-play services, handling everything from pre-production to distribution, so you can focus on your message while Anne and her team manage the rest. Leverage Anne's Hollywood production knowledge, strategic business insight, and social media expertise to amplify your reach and impact. If you're ready to elevate your voice, connect with Anne Scottlin at Podcast Maestro and begin your podcast journey today.
Welcome back to the second part of our show today, which is part 2 of Unlock the Interview Secrets of the Pros. We have gone over a lot of those in the last episode and today. And this is really the art of interviewing, how to get the best out of your guests. And also our next to last episode in my series, the Podcast Power Playbook. So you are here in the nick of time. I hope if you've been listening, you stick around. And if you just joined us, hang tight. You're still going to get some great value in the next few minutes. So talking about conducting the interview and how to get the best out of your guests, we talked a lot about active listening. But another really important point is flexibility. So this is interesting, and this requires a little bit of practiced intuition. I use that word freely. I don't mean to be frou-frou, rainbows and butterflies about that. I use it as a factual way of deducing of observing the situation and deducing what should happen next. So that is what I call, that's a really big part of active listening. And that's what I mean when I say intuition. So practiced intuition means be prepared to deviate from your script based on your guests' responses. So you can be a little flexible within your outline, right? You want to be comfortable. You want to be conversational. You want to be a little bit flexible. But again, you don't want to deviate so far off course that you never get the 3 promise points out, right? You want to allow the conversation to flow naturally. So sometimes you will have a parenthetical conversation. That is fine. Just be aware that you've started a parenthetical conversation, or they have, and that it will have an end. And mentally make a note of that when you're in your outline. If they start talking about, if their dog barks on the show and they talk about their dog, and then you talk about your dog, and everyone feels all happy and fuzzy and warm because we're talking about our pets. And then you're like, oh yes, we are in a parentheses where this needs to wrap up, parenthetical conversation. And if you are practiced, you can transition right back into your outline. I'll do that right now. So since I love my dogs so much, and I wish I could just have conversations with them, that would be amazing. But instead, I'm going to go back to our outline here and talk about asking thoughtful questions. I just did it. See, so that is my next point right now in my outline, which is asking thoughtful questions. That's part 3 of conducting the interview. 1, active listening. 2, flexibility. 3, ask thoughtful questions. So how do you create balance between easy and challenging questions? This is a really interesting topic. It has something to do with the ease and flow of the conversation. If you really want to learn, watch some of the best interviewers in the news. In the old days, I hate to say that, Christiana Amanpour, sorry. Watch people like that who have an incredible gift for creating a comfortable environment. Sometimes she was interviewing guests from very hostile parts of the world, from governments, like incredibly difficult and challenging interviews many times. Or someone who's talking about being experiencing torture and a human rights disaster in their own country. You have to go in with sensitivity, with empathy. You want to create that environment, as we just talked about, that makes them feel comfortable. But then you also have like your 1, 2, or 3 power questions, like where the rubber meets the road, the real meat of the conversation. And it depends on what your topic is, where those land. If it's just a business related topic, those could land, beginning, middle, end, or anywhere you like. But it's just like a book. It's like a story. It's like a novel, right? Where if everything was just action the whole time, which some people like that, and that's okay. But typically, even action stories have movement of emotion. They have dips, right? We have a romantic moment, and then we go back to action. And then we have an introspective moment where there's deep thought or maybe sadness or depression. And then we go back into action. And then we have a tender moment, which is interacting with maybe a child or a dog or something beautiful in nature. And then we go back into action. So you see, the human nervous system and the human brain needs the comparisons. It needs the ride to stay engaged. Because that's okay. You know what you feel like when you get really bored listening to something, sitting somewhere where you're trapped for an hour or 2 or 3, or at a graduation. Oh, wait, did I say that? Sorry. When you get really, really bored, your brain just kind of, right? It's not, but even if you were bored, even if it was just a light conversation about nothing, and then all of a sudden someone pops you with a really interesting question that you knew might come at some point. What was the greatest impact on your life when you were divorced? Wow, we're awake now. Oh my gosh. Whoa, right? But then that could be really intense. So after a few minutes, then you want to go back out to. So you mentioned that during your divorce, you traveled to Germany and spent some time living there. What was that like? I know you love to travel. Tell me a little bit more. Well, a relief. Now they can be like, okay. All right, I'm not like in the corner on the spot. I can relax, share something that's pleasurable for me that the audience will also enjoy. And as the interviewer, I know it's going to be interesting. So you see how that play of easy and hard questions is really, really going to serve you. And then also encourage storytelling. So asking open-ended questions, not like the yes and no questions. We've touched on that before, but encourage your guest by asking questions like, can you tell me more about that? Right? And even your own energy, I'm just going to say, makes so much difference, because you could say, can you tell me more about that? And if it's a really somber conversation, then that's fine. But if you have an up energy, or if you have the kind of energy I like to have, which is who I am, it's like, can you tell me more about that? That sounds so interesting, right? Like, be legitimately engaged and interested. I cannot say that enough about the active listening. Or what was that experience like for you? Like, that's fascinating. Really listen to the answer too. These are some of the ways the pros get the best out of their guests. When you really want to unlock those interview secrets, these are several keys, really strong ones, leading keys. As you know, we're wrapping up the end of our episode right now, which was part 2. So go back and listen to part 1, which was part 8 of this series, the Podcast Power Playbook. Go back and watch episode 1 if you want the whole shebang, all the way from how to prepare, and then also how to create that comfortable environment, which we talked about today, and conducting the interview itself. Finding those tricks. I would love to hear what has worked for you. If you're already a host, an interviewer, a podcaster, or a show host, what has worked for you? And what is one tip that you would love to share with us? So please send it in. I know some of you have been sending it in. In fact, I'm going to read a comment next episode from one of our listeners. Super appreciate that. Thank you so much for your comments and questions. And yes, let me know. I would love to know. So last comments I had was, answering the bonus question. Actually, we have one more part here that I'm going to tell you right before I go, which is the post-interview. All right, post-interview. I missed my own outline there. The post-interview. The interview's over. Don't have to worry about getting the best out of my guests anymore. What are those interview secrets of the pros? I think that's all over. Yes, and we'll do this for another day, but just to wrap up, so you get the full picture, post-interview, the best practices. So review and reflect after the interview. Like, listen to your own recording and make notes of what went well and where you can improve as the host. This is how tips of the pros. This is how the pros do it. Reevaluate your own work. You can also ask your producer or someone else to do it for you. Or if I'm producing for you, you can ask for me. But do that. Review. It's valuable. So valuable. And be sure to thank your guest with a personalized message after the fact. There's still something special to be said for a handwritten thank you card. No one gets them anymore, so they're quite special, but at least a text, a message, an email, something that really struck you about the interview and how much you appreciate them, because multiple reasons. 1, you're just grateful. 2, you might want them back. And especially if they're a high profile guest, you want to make sure they know they were appreciated. And 3, they might recommend other people to your show who would make fantastic guests. And bonus 4, they might even invite you to be a guest on a show that they facilitate or are a host on or have guested on in the past. So you really want to keep them engaged. Make sure you add them to your mailing list, your publicity list. Not annoying, not every email, but like your quarterly kind of newsletter or personal updates would be even better. And if you really like them, let them know it. And tell them, if you really did, that they're invited back anytime. There's nothing nicer for me as a guest on other shows when they say after the end, you are welcome back anytime. Please just find a place in your calendar where we can spend some more time together. Talking about this is the best feeling. That is such a lovely way to make your guests feel welcome. And then finally, edit for clarity and flow. Make sure that you've edited it, that you've taken out the extra words, the ums, the uhs, that you've polished it, that you've made it engaging. Now, this is only really available if you're pre-recording. If you're streaming live, that's its own animal, has its own pros and cons. We'll talk about that again in the future. If you are recording in advance, definitely edit it out. Edit it, make it smooth, make your guest really shine. If they did have, heaven forbid, some technical problem, see if you can't have your team get some of those correct, some of those technical glitches, or cut out a few sentences in a response where there was a huge delay. Make it smooth. Not only does this help you and make your show look world class, but it's also going to help your guest look their best, which is what will bring them back. So there's always more I could share, but this has been so much fun. I just didn't even realize that this episode was going to end up being 2 episodes. Originally, I thought it was just going to be 1, but there was so much I kept coming up with to thinking of to tell you. I hope it was useful. And please be prepared when you have guests. Please create a comfortable environment. Please make that interview a very active listening experience. And even post-interview, set yourself up for the next one in a really positive way. And again, my exclusive tip for this subject is the one that top interviewers use: leave a moment of silence after the guest finishes speaking. This often prompts them to continue talking and give even more details. We talked about this last time. I'm reminding it of you now. If you want to hear me go into that in detail, go back and listen to the previous episode. Please do like and subscribe to the show. I'm so delighted to have you here today, either watching or listening. Send me comments on whatever platform you are, or directly on the website, annescottlin.com, on LinkedIn. Also happy and delighted to hear from you there and connect there. And share this with someone else who might really enjoy learning how to make their podcast better, or the tricks of the trade if they don't have one yet and are thinking about it. Next time, we are going to, in our last episode, one of the things we're going to talk about is creating compelling podcast titles and descriptions. It's not just a snap your fingers thing. There is an art and a science to creating professional world-class titles, descriptions, memos, so you can really attract and hold your listeners from the start. So stay tuned for that next time. As always, be well, enjoy podcasting, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.